Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you want to learn belly dance in this new year but you don't know where to start from, then this series of videos will be perfect for you. This video is the fourth video in this series, so if you haven't seen the first three, I recommend you go check them out first because today's move depends heavily on the first three videos. Today is our first compound movements of the series, so it's going to be the inner circle or the interior hip circle. So everything is inside the body. We're not leaving the axis of the body. So we will need the first move that we learned in this series, which was the hip lift. And we're going to need the hip tuck and release, which we learned in the previous week's video. So these two movements are essential for today's move. If you're ready, then let's get started. All right, guys, the first thing we need to do is bend our knees. The reason for that is we need the range of motion for the hip lift that we talked about in the first video. So without bent knees, the movement is impossible to rotate inside the body. It's gonna go outside the body. So we need the knees to be bent to start, and we're going to do now a square movement. The square movement is the precursor of the interior circle. So it is the same thing but chopped up instead of being smooth and flowy. So this gives you a chance to focus on each segment rather than doing the entire circle at once. So let's just warm up the hip lift. Make sure our hip lift is exactly inside the body. It's not swaying outside. Our knees are helping us and the heels are on the floor. And let's warm up the hip tuck and release. Make sure it's inside the body as well. When I tuck, my belly button closes on itself. And when I release, my lower back arches a little bit. So tuck, release, no pushing forward and back, just under the body. Now that we have warmed up these movements, we're going to attach them together, but in a chopped way. So we start by lifting our left hip, but we make sure to keep it lifted while we're moving to tuck the hip in. So keep the hip lifted and tuck your hip in. Now keep it tucked in while you lift the right hip. Now keep the right hip lifted while you release the tuck. Now lift again while keeping the release in place. Keep it in place and tuck. Keep it in place and lift. Keep it in place and release. Keep it in place and lift. Keep it in place, and we keep going like that. So why do we keep the previous movement intact? It's because we want it to be cohesive. We don't want it to be lift and back, in and out, lift and back. It looks like we're working on isolations or accents of the hip, like working with a drum, but not cohesively moving from one to the other. We want them to be holding hands when we're moving to the next one. So I lift and I keep this lifted and I tuck. Now I keep this tucked and I lift. I keep this lifted and I release, right? So lift, tuck, lift, release. Lift, tuck, lift, release. 1, 2, 3, 4. Lift, tuck, lift, release. Now what do? I reverse the direction. It's important to practice from both sides. So now I was starting from my left and going forward. Now I have to try starting from the right and then going forward. So right, tuck, left, release. Right, tuck, left, release. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to notice that usually the third movement, which is the lift on the second hip, is going to be the one that wants to escape out the most. Because once we start, let's say lifted here on the right, tucked the hip in, when I'm going to do this left lift, I'm going to feel like there's so much going on. I already feel the crowdedness. I already feel a lot of contraction in my belly and waist. So when I want to do this, my hip would be like, no, I'm escaping this mess. So it will slide out. Here, I want you to focus, to actually use your knee to help you push straight up. No matter how tight you feel, try to push that feeling aside. Try to work through it and try to think that if I lift this one, I'm going to release the opposite hip. So it's okay. I'm just transferring energy to the other side, right? So lift, tuck, focus on the knee now to help you lift and release. Lift, tuck, and straight up, release. Lift, tuck, straight up, release. So that's the main point I want you to focus on. After you are now used to the square, it's easy for you to move from one point to the next. Try to attach them like you're connecting the dots together. So we start with lifting in, lifting out, lifting in, lifting out. See how my knees help me all the time. When I'm doing a hip lift, one knee is straightening out more. So the knees never stop helping me with the hip lifts. Now I reverse the direction. So if I was doing it this way, let's say clockwise, now I say, okay, anti-clockwise, just to make sure that I can do both directions and not miss out, because sometimes I want to change direction in the middle of a choreography, like 1, 2 and reverse, 2 and 1, 2 and reverse, 2. So I have to have that ability that both circles on each side or for each direction are strong equally. So now I want to show you what could go wrong in this circle in 2 ways. The first thing is your hip escaping, which we talked about. So it's going to the side like this. Do you see this sway in the hip side to side? This is the one thing that we need to pay attention to, because in the future we might want to stylize the movement and have it like interior and exterior at the same time. But for now, it's very important to be able to do the basic move very well, and then you can feel free to change it up, stylize it later on. So this is the first thing, is the hip swaying side to side. So I want to imagine that I'm wrapped around and I cannot escape this barrier. And I'm just rotating inside my body. This circle looks like a plate that fell on the floor and is just rotating in place like this. Same thing with the hip. Imagine it like a plate on the floor and just keeps on spinning in its place, not leaving its place. Now, the second thing that could go wrong is the hip pushing forward and back. So I'll show you from the side how that could look like. So let's say the hip lift is correct, but every time I reach front, I'm pushing forward. I'm pushing forward. Or every time I reach back, I take it back. I take it back like this. So I need to pay attention from all the sides, right, front, left, and back, that I'm inside my body. So I'll show you from the side how the correct one would look like. So in, 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 in. I'm not pushing forward and I'm not pushing back. I'm just lifting my pelvis up and back, but without pushing it behind me, right? So 1, 2, 1, 2, and reverse, 2, reverse, 2. All right, guys, this was the move for today. I know it's difficult. All my students suffer with it a little bit in the beginning, but once you put the work in, it improves a lot of things for you. It improves the basics like the lift and the tuck, and it will also be very great for you in the future when you do undulations and you want to use this part of your body. So it's worth it. Stick with the practice, and as always, take it slow and partition it. So start with the lift and the tuck, then do the square, then do the circle slowly, and give yourself observation time so you can see yourself. Okay, I'm doing this step by step, all correct, let's move on. All right? If you would like to book a Zoom class with me, the link is in the description, and I will see you in the next class.